Hi, welcome to the CV Preparation Pre-Conference Workshop. My name is John McMullen, and I am a member of the Sponsorship Committee. Outside of my volunteer position with oSTEM, I am a second-year graduate student at Cornell University pursuing a PhD in entomology. Today I will provide some advice about how to structure your CV or curriculum vitae to help you highlight your best attributes. As you can probably gather from my introduction, my experience is in the biological sciences. So there may be additional topics relevant to include in your CV due to your STEM discipline, which I will not touch on in enough detail today. Therefore, it is advised that you get your CV critiqued by people relevant to your field. A CV is going to be used for academic, government, or other research institutions. As most of you are likely going to be at the undergraduate level, a CV will most likely be important for you as you consider applying to degree-seeking graduate programs or post-baccalaureate research positions. The main purpose of this document is to highlight all of your accomplishments and the service that you provide to your STEM field, which is likely going to take up more than the 1 to 2 pages that you'll see in a resume. And unlike a resume, the people reviewing your CV will likely spend more time reviewing it since it is a more extensive document. Today I will go over a few different topics to help you better navigate how to prepare a CV, which includes the content, in particular the sections, the structure and format, and I'll also go through an example. We also have several additional resources available with this pre-conference workshop, which include Resume Building 101, Resume for Budding Professionals, and advice and tips from LGBT professionals. A CV will generally contain more sections than your typical resume because you want to highlight everything or almost everything that you've done. In a resume, you typically want to highlight the most important or relevant information within a page or two, while in a CV, you may find that your accomplishments are spread across several pages. If you have viewed the resume workshop video, you will likely see how these two documents differ from one another. In a CV, there are several sections that you may want to include. The first on your CV is going to be your header, which is going to display your name in a large size font, as well as your address, contact information, and a website or other form of social media that you use professionally. Then, as you go through the rest of your sections, you'll likely see things typically as you would see in a resume like education. However, you'll have more extensive sections on different positions you've held within research experiences and teaching experiences, as well as publications and presentations, and you'll likely want to have sections for awards and grants and scholarships, your professional service, which could be your participation in oSTEM, as well as other organizations, and finally any professional societies that you may belong to. You may want to include additional sections depending on your discipline and the stage of your career. For instance, if you do not have any publications and few, if any, presentations, you might want to consider a relevant courses or skills section to highlight what content you have been exposed to or the techniques that you have. For the structure and format of your CV, you'll want to make sure that it can be easily read. Typically, you'll want to use a font like Times New Roman or Arial, roughly font size 12. You want to make sure that the sections have headers that easily stand out. For instance, you may want to use all caps. It's most important that as you organize all of your sections, that they're consistent between each of them. For publications, they should be formatted in a citation method according to your discipline. And lastly, you want to make sure that all of your sections are done in reverse chronological order. Now, we're going to go over an example. I'm going to go through and show you my CV. Please note that what I'm going to be showing you is my full CV, so this is what I use to maintain all of my information. As I go through and show you what I have, I might not actually use this content for applying for a job or some certain position because it may not actually be required, but as you're building up your CV, it's good to make sure that you list everything. So very briefly, to show you how my CV is structured, you can see I have my header, here's my name in large size font, I have my address, and then I have my email and contact information. So I have several sections and more sections that you saw in the presentation that I presented. So first I have education, then I have research experience, teaching experience, scientific publications, presentations, grants, scholarships, and awards. I have a section for the students that I've mentored, a section on professional service, and lastly, the professional societies that I belong to. So let's start at the beginning. For education, you can see the 3 different degrees that I have or I'm currently working on. For graduate students, it's always good to make sure that you add things like your advisor and who your committee members are. You may want to include the title of your thesis, which I did here for my master's. You can notice here I'm still early in my PhD career, so I don't have any title for my dissertation. You may be thinking about considering a GPA, and if you're at the undergraduate level, these are good things that you'd want to include. As you move on, you may or may not want to include those. So here I don't actually include my GPA for my undergrad, but I did have an honor that distinguishes my GPA by putting summa cum laude. So these are things to take in consideration if you're past the undergraduate level. Next, looking at research experience, you can see here I have it organized by year, and I have bolded my title, and then if I was in a lab, what the lab name was of the PI, and then what institution that was at. And I try to include some sort of brief description underneath to tell a little bit of detail what I did. Some of my graduate research assistant positions are a bit more vague since I have a lot of other details up above in the education section. But for some of the work that I did in undergrad, you can see that I would have a bit more detail. For an example, for an internship I did at the Arizona Department of Game and Fish, I included some of the field work that I did, the programs that I became familiar with, and since I do organize my sections just by year, it was only a 7-month internship, so I made sure to include that time so I'm not over building up how much I did with that department. Next, we'll move on to the teaching section. You can see that as in the research section, I have my position bolded, and then I have everything organized in reverse chronological order. I include the institution that I taught at. Here in the teaching section, I include both graduate and undergraduate teaching assistantships that I've held. I include the class title. Things like NTOM 2100 really aren't that useful, and it's only within your institution that actually matters. So in general, you don't really need to keep this on your CV when you submit it to other places. It's good to include if it was a semester course or a month long or however long it was, the number of students that you instructed, and also it's nice to include sections about what you did, whether you developed homework, graded assignments, whatever you may have done in that teaching assistantship role. Next, we have scientific publications. Here I bold my name and all of my publications so that whoever's reviewing it can easily find where I'm at within the list of co-authors. All of my citations are formatted in a format that's typical for microbiology journals. And you'll notice here I have a section that's called In Prep. So these are different manuscripts that I'm working on and are at the point that I can actually say, hey, I have something and I have some data and I've written it up. And it's not just I'm working in the lab and trying to get data together. So if you are at this stage of writing, it's good to also include that in your CV so then people will know when you go to submit it, hey, I'm working on things even though I may not have anything published. The next section I have are presentations. Now, depending on what stage you're at, you may only have a few poster presentations that you've done. But as you progress, it's good to then go through and differentiate what you've done. So I have my presentations broken down into 3 sections. Oral presentations, so these are talks that I've given at conferences. Then I have seminars, which are seminars that I've given for departments. And then finally I have all the posters that I presented at different conferences. And you'll notice again, like in the publication section, I have my name bolded. If I'm not the first person listed, this means that I'm not the one that presented, and I have a little asterisk, which at the bottom, you can see that I know that actually indicates that I'm not the presenting author and that someone else was. Next, if you worked with other undergraduate students, especially as you're advancing to going to grad school, it shows maybe you've mentored these students, so you may also want to highlight that. And so you can see here This was a student that I had mentored in 2012, and she gave a poster, and so I indicated that that was her poster and that she was an undergrad that I worked with. In the next section, grants, scholarships, and awards, you want to go through, and any sort of grant or award you get, make sure that you keep a record of it. In my CV my full CV that I maintain, I always include the amount of money I was awarded if it was some sort of fellowship. You'll note that I don't have any of that included here, but typically you want to make sure you keep note of that, because over time you'll lose track of those things. The student mentoring section is one you typically won't see in most people's CVs, but I think it's really nice and shows your ability to work with people and manage students. So I always include their name, how long I mentored them, and then if they were through a certain program or if it was their honors thesis, I would include that information as well as what they did. For my penultimate section, you'll see I have a whole section dedicated for professional service. Although it's put at the end, it's almost just as important as your publications and your education and your research experience. It all just depends about who your audience is and who you're working with. And so when you go through, you'll want to make sure that you highlight whatever outreach activities you've done, any positions you've held in organizations. So you can see that I have different subsections. So I have community outreach, I have the organizations that I'm affiliated with, and the positions I've held, and then any committees that I've served on. For the community outreach, it's super important that you keep note of whatever outreach you do related to STEM. As long as you tack it on, then you won't have to worry about trying to dredge up old information about different outreach activities you participated in, and it looks really good and shows that you're involved in your STEM community. So here's an example of how you might want to structure it. So this past year, I was involved in a genomics workshop with 2 different educational institutions, not at Cornell, and so I put that this was something that I volunteered at, and I have a little bit more of a description of what I did for that activity. So I was a presenter, and I helped students get a better sense of how to use genomics as an integral research tool, and what are some of the questions that you can use or that you can answer with that technique. So these are things that you'll want to include in your outreach, not just the fact that you did it, but what you did. And similarly for organizations, I have what organizations I've participated in. So here you can see that I've put, if I just put GGAD, you may not understand what that is, but I have a little disclaimer that this is the Graduate Entomology Organization. So if it's not going to be inherently obvious with your organization's title, make sure that you put some sort of additional disclaimer on it so that people know you did, and then have some way to recognize the different roles that you've had in that organization. And finally, professional societies. These will be any societies that you're a part of. Could be the Entomological Society of America, could be the American Chemical Society, whatever it may be. If you are paying to be a member of that society, then it's good to also note that in your CV so that people know what groups you're involved in scientifically. So we've gone through several topics today on CVs. The best piece of advice is have as many people relevant to your field check over your CV. Other things that we haven't talked about today that could be important: if you've studied abroad, make sure you include that information. Science is a collaborative effort, and it's always nice to see that you are becoming a global citizen. And most importantly, make sure that you tailor your CV for whatever position you're applying to. Although it's nice that you have this document that shows the breadth of activities that you're involved in, you want to make sure that you still are using your CV to your best advantage and that you're organizing it from most and least important. Lastly, make sure you spell check. The people who are going to be reading over your CV are actually going to be spending quite a bit of time and will become a bit more familiar with your different activities. So make sure you spell check and you don't have those little pieces missing that really add to the quality of what you do. And thank you for your time.